Hi, this is Mark Plain with another episode of from Not on the Beeb, and today got some very interesting pair of sisters on. We've got a bit of a story to tell. Louise and Lisa Meadows. You might recognise Louise from her video that went viral about a week ago, and this has kind of led, from what I can see, it's also led to many other people also stepping forward with the same story. And the story is what's been happening with the MHRA and the reporting of incidents that's been happening due to the vaccine. So I want to say a big hello, Louise. Big hello, Lisa.
Hello.
Hi.
Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Thanks.
Thanks for having us.
Okay. Louise, tell us, start from the beginning and tell us what happened in January.
Okay, so unfortunately my parents went for their Pfizer vaccination, unbeknown to Lisa and I. We didn't want them to have the vaccination, but they believed they were doing the right thing. So it was the 23rd
of January.
Saturday, the 23rd of January in the afternoon, they went for the vaccination. So by Sunday afternoon, my dad was experiencing indigestion in his solar plexus. My mum was asking him, do you have any pains in your arms? But he was saying, no, it's literally just indigestion in my solar plexus. And that was on the Sunday afternoon. So less than 24 hours since the vaccination. And it got worse over the course of the evening. And then next day he was still suffering with the indigestion, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So
my mum phoned me and told me that he wasn't well. Told me that he'd had this really bad indigestion, hadn't been able to sleep, hadn't been able to eat anything, and it was really quite severe. That he took himself off downstairs onto the sofa so that he wouldn't disturb my mum in the night. So that was a Sunday evening. Monday she phoned me to tell me he wasn't well, so I went round to see him about lunchtime-ish. He didn't look that bad facially. He wasn't grey or sweating or anything like that. But he did look uncomfortable, and he hadn't been able to eat, and he hadn't slept, and he just kept saying that he had this awful indigestion in his solar plexus. So he'd had some Gaviscon, see if that made a difference. And then we asked him if he wanted to phone the doctors or maybe phone 111 or actually take him to A&E.
And he wouldn't.
He wouldn't go.
No.
He'd never been in hospital before.
Right.
Very, very fit. He was in hospital once as a child, I think, to have his tonsils removed or something like that. That was it. He'd never been in hospital. Very rarely visited the doctor.
And also, he doesn't like to cause a scene. My daddy doesn't like to waste people's time. He didn't want an ambulance turning up. He didn't want to waste time.
He would have been mortified if an ambulance turned up outside the house. That's the kind of character that he was. So then I went home. Wasn't really too concerned, to be honest with you. On the Tuesday, I phoned my mum and she said, the pain seems to have subsided now. We're just going to go for a walk around the park, as they did every single day. And that was that. I was homeschooling the kids because they were off school. We were both busy. So Wednesday comes and she phoned me again to say he's just not well. And I said, what still? I thought you said he was getting better. And now we had shortness of breath.
Now, we didn't know that he had the Pfizer vaccination. So this was Wednesday now.
Right. That's a very interesting point. So
because our parents knew that we didn't want them to have this vaccine. We told them that it was an experimental vaccine and it hadn't been through the usual tests, and just to hold back and wait and see. But they wouldn't listen. So we only found out that they had the Pfizer vaccination on Wednesday, when my dad's condition began to worsen.
Right.
So I asked them if they'd had the vaccination over the phone. I was told no by my mum. She didn't want to upset me. And I said, really? Well, that doesn't make sense to me, because I knew of friends' parents who were younger than my dad who had already been called forward, and I assumed it was happening in age order. So then when I questioned her again about it, she admitted it, that they had it. So I said, right, well, as soon as my husband gets in from work, I'll be coming round to see my dad. So I went round to see him on the Wednesday evening about 7
Oh,
p.m.
hold on. 1 o'clock. This is really important. 1 o'clock on the Wednesday.
Oh yes.
1
Sorry
p.m.
about-
He had a phone call consultation with a GP.
Right.
And told the GP all of his symptoms. And she told him that you are more than likely having a reaction to the vaccine. It's your symptoms look like you're having a mild reaction to the vaccine. Call us back in a couple of days if it gets worse.
Yeah.
And she did not invite him in for to take his blood pressure or anything. The advice he was given was call us back in a couple of days. That's really important to know. And that was 1 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm not a medical professional, but at the end of the day, 76-year-old man phoning you, clear medical history, but he has had a vaccination, and he's now shortness of breath, terrible indigestion, not eaten, not slept for 3 days now. And she told him basically take it easy and give us a call back in a couple of days.
This makes this. I mean, when you hear a reaction like that, it makes you think that maybe they're getting a lot of phone calls like that.
Yeah, we don't know, do we? Because people aren't. Yeah. But I would have thought at the very least, if anybody really phones up with shortness of breath, regardless of their age or the medical history, you'd at least want to listen to their chest.
Yeah.
You would at least want to listen to their chest,
Yeah.
take their blood pressure, take their resting heart rate. And like I say, I'm not a medical professional, and I would know that. So I went round to my parents' house, and we had a blood pressure monitor that my mum had once when she was having issues. We took that, and his blood pressure was slightly low. Didn't really raise any concerns to me. But I've got a watch that measures heart rate, so I put it on his wrist, and he was sat doing nothing, and his heart rate was 122 beats per minute. Right. So normally sat down, relaxing of an evening, you can expect it to be anywhere between sort of 60 and 80, depending on your level of fitness, your age, and everything. It was 122 beats per minute. So at that point, I said to him, I'm not asking you anymore. We're going to see somebody. That's it. And actually, he looked worried, and he said, okay. So we phoned 111. We had another sort of 10-minute consultation with the, whatever you want to call it, receptionist. And then we were phoned back by a nurse. We had another 20-minute conversation with the nurse. She decided to get him in.
Right.
So we had an appointment there at 8:30, and by 10 to 9, there was an ambulance waiting for him to take him to A&E.
With suspected pneumonia.
Yeah, suspected pneumonia, they said.
Just to stop 1 second, just go back, because I can't remember. When you on that first phone call, was that a GP or was that NHS Direct that sent
a GP?
That was a GP, because he'd already had the conversation. You know how you have a conversation with someone on the phone, and then they decide, and then someone calls you back. So he'd already had. Is that right? Am I right in saying
no?
that?
He had. You mean with the GP on the Wednesday afternoon?
Yeah.
Yeah. He had a. I think he booked. Yeah, he must have booked a, because they're doing consultations now to see whether you actually need an appointment. Yeah. So then he got an appointment time for 1 o'clock. So it's a slot where a GP will phone you. So it's like a telephone appointment instead of actually a physical appointment. So yeah, that's where we're up to now. So
he went to A&E.
He went. Yeah. So he was taken to A&E with suspected pneumonia.
On his own. Yeah. He was scared to death, I have to add, because like I say, he's never been into hospital before. So they took him off. And then they did a COVID test on him as soon as he got to A&E, which was negative. That's really important to point out. His COVID test was negative.
Right.
So we then got a phone call at 1 a.m. Thursday morning to say that the blood results had come back, and my dad had a heart attack, a substantial heart attack, on Sunday. So we were to call the following day. But at 3:30 in the morning, we got a second phone call to say, your dad has just had another heart attack whilst being in A&E. You need to come to the hospital right now. So, the dreaded phone call that you all dread. So we raced to the hospital. Hysterical, obviously. And when we got to the hospital, the doctor took us to one side before we saw our dad, took us into his office and said that your dad has got 4 hours to live. And we were obviously hysterical because he'd gone on into A&E with suspected pneumonia, and then we were told he'd had a heart attack, and then a second heart attack, now 4 hours to live. So yeah, 33 hours later, yeah, he passed, but he fought for his life. But we need to point out that we asked the first doctor who dealt with my dad, do you think this has been a reaction to the Pfizer vaccination? You need to know that he had this on Saturday, and the first doctor said, no, this will not be a reaction to the Pfizer vaccination. And I said, well, we think it possibly could be. No. So he said, all right, okay. But then he went off duty, and we had another gentleman that came on, a cardiologist, who said to us, I've read the reports of the previous doctor, but I'm not willing to give up on your dad yet. So we're going to look at more things we can do to help him. So what we found out, that whatever they did, obviously we're not from a medical background, but whatever they did, it wasn't working. And they then pulled us into the doctor's room again and said, we have treated your dad for everything to do with his heart condition. He is the fittest 76-year-old man we have ever seen, and we do not understand why he is not responding to this treatment. And we then said, do you think this is possibly a reaction of the Pfizer vaccination? And he said, I wouldn't rule it out. So he also said that we want to test him again for COVID. Is that right? Yeah. And we were hysterical in the consultation room and told him under no circumstances do you test our dad for COVID, because you have your negative test. You've got your negative test. And if you test him for COVID and keep testing him and a result comes back positive, you will take him away from us and we will not be able to be with him. So the cardiologist looked at the nurse, who was particularly amazing, and they looked at each other and they glanced at each other, and between them they decided that they wouldn't do another COVID test, and they would treat him as a heart patient but treat him for COVID as well.
Right.
So he had everything thrown at him and nothing worked. His kidneys failed because of the treatment. Basically, his lungs were filling up with fluid, and the treatment was not draining his lungs. Am I right in saying this? Yeah. And the treatment was not draining his lungs as it should. So that treatment then caused his kidneys to become damaged. So they had to stop that treatment then. And then what happened? He progressively got worse. So he was on morphine with an oxygen mask. And we started to see over many hours of it, he started to slowly deteriorate. And then on the Thursday evening, and it was around about 9:30, 10 at night, and we'd been there since 4 in that morning, he started to cough up blood, and we panicked. And I went to the doctor, who was now the first doctor that we'd seen. He'd come back on duty, and I said, look, my dad is coughing up blood, and I am not going to sit here and watch him continue to cough up blood. What are you going to do about it? There must be some kind of treatment. You can treat him. I don't want him to die in this way. And he said, I'm sorry, he said, there's absolutely nothing we can do with him now. And what you're doing by keeping him on his oxygen is just prolonging his death. And he said, I said, well, I want whatever happens next to be pain-free, and I don't want him to know what's happening to him. I want you to sedate him. I want you to give him morphine, and I want you to stop him coughing up blood. So he said, well, then we need to discuss end-of-life treatment. So we agreed with on the end of life treatment without telling my mum. She was with my dad, and we decided not to tell my mum what we decided on. So that was the plan. And then after we decided on end of life treatment, I panicked and I ran back to the doctor and I said, are you 100% sure there's nothing you can do about it before we agree to this end of life treatment? And he said, I'm 100% sure. You know, there's nothing we can do for your dad. So that's when we decided on the treatment. And, you know, there is negligence that happened in the hospital, which is another issue that we're looking into. I knew something was wrong because we decided on end of life treatment at 11 o'clock and he didn't get the medication, the full medication of end of life treatment until 1:30 in the morning. And I kept chasing the nurse, kept chasing her to say, why haven't you got that second medication? I heard the doctor say to you that you have to do this straight away, and they couldn't find the medication. But I mean, that's another story that we're pursuing. So yeah, we decided on end of life around about 11 midnight on the Thursday. The doctor thought it would be a couple of hours before he passed, but he fought and he fought and he fought, and he passed away on Friday at 1:55 in the afternoon. And for us, that just proves
that's how fit he was.
How fit he was. This was not a frail old man. No. This was someone who was fighting for his life. And he didn't want to die. So he wasn't a frail man. I need people to understand that. He was 76, yes, but he was a fit, healthy man.
Thank you for just telling us about that. But while we're on that point of just saying fit and healthy, before we continue with the hospitals and the kind of medication story, tell us about your dad, because he was fit. I've seen some fantastic photographs. I'll tell you what, let's just take a little break right now and let's see who this gentleman is, because with this little collection of photographs that just edited together, I think you'll get a taste. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so there we are. There's some lovely photographs there. And I didn't catch your father's name. What was his name? Peter.
Yeah.
So tell us just a bit about his kind of career and his love of the outdoors, from what I can see from those photographs.
Yeah.
Well, he joined the army when he was 17. And then when he was stationed in Africa, isn't he?
Yeah.
And then he was a Morse code operator. So he's a very clever man. And when he came out of the army, he joined the police. So his father was a Grenadier Guard and then a police officer. His father obviously fought in the war. In fact, I have to mention that we're very proud of my granddad because he was a big hero in World War II, and that's another story.
Wow.
Big hero. And my dad was super proud. His medals are in a museum in London. Our granddad's medals. And my dad would like me to mention that.
Yeah, I bet.
So my dad and my dad's eldest brother Mike followed in our granddad's footsteps, and they joined the police. Mike, his brother, was in the police in London, and my dad was in the Greater Manchester Police up here. He was a sergeant. He was in TAG. He was involved in the Moss Side riots. He was an old-fashioned good guy policeman, if that makes sense. He was very well respected. And one of the stories that I spoke at his funeral, because Lisa and I, we both stood up and spoke, was that when I was a little girl, I used to walk around our local shopping centre with my dad, and young men, you know, how can I, undesirable characters, undesirable characters would say, all right, Sergeant Meadows, and he'd let on to them, and I'd say, who is that, Dad? And he said, just somebody that I work with, you know, and they knew him because he'd probably arrested them, or he was a custody officer, so he'd have dealings with them, but they all respected him because he was a really, really good policeman, and he was one of those guys, one of those gentlemen he was a gentleman who just had respect. People just respected him. And so he won awards in the police. He got the Divisional Commander's Award when he retired, and what was the other conduct award? Some other conduct award that I can't remember off the top of my head.
It's called.
So yeah, he was you know, fantastic at his job and a total perfectionist, so much so that even if he went to the doctors or the dentist, he would wear a shirt, a tie, a jacket, and we would say, why are you wearing a shirt and tie? Where are you going? He said, I'm going to the dentist. I say, all right. And he'd polish his shoes, and his shoes would be immaculately polished. So this is the kind of man we are talking about.
I mean, I'm just laughing that when he was short of breath and he'd had indigestion for 3 days, and he, you know, really wasn't well, and we were taking him to his out of hours appointment at 8:30 on the Wednesday evening. He went upstairs and said, what are you doing? I'm just going to change my shirt and my jumper.
Yeah.
And he put a clean shirt on, clean jumper, got his nice coat, you know, get ready to go, because that's the kind of man that he was.
Yeah.
He was very proud.
And as little girls, he took us hiking everywhere. You know, we hiked up Ben Nevis. When I was 10, Lisa was 7, and we had caravan. He took us all around the UK. We've seen everywhere. You know, we 100% outdoors. And I had a passion for horses and still do. And when I was a little girl, I started riding at the age of 4. And because I had nobody to ride with me, he started horse riding with me. So we used to have lessons together. Until then, you wanted to ride, didn't you? So then he gave his place up for my sister. But yeah, and then with the grandchildren as a grandfather, absolutely exceptional. It really wasn't he? We all have caravans, so we camp together in a massive big group, and he takes part with our kayaking, still hikes with us, and skiing. I got married in Austria, so we all decided to learn how to ski. Now, he was 60 when he learned how to ski, didn't he? And he came on holiday with a group of 30-year-olds, him and my mum, and he was so dedicated to learning how to ski and wanting to ski with his grandchildren in the future that he went off on how many skiing holidays on his own? 3 skiing holidays on his own to perfect his skills with skiing.
To bring him up to standard.
And he did ski with his grandchildren, and you know, he was a better skier than me. So
he was quite good, to be honest with you.
You know, he surfs. He's got a little wetsuit, as you saw in the photographs.
Horse riding,
surfing, skiing, hiking, everything really. You know, and every day he walked my dog for me, every single day, because I'm too busy at the stables with my horse. So, you know, a good hour and a half walk every single day, up and down the hills in our local park.
Steps, everything.
And that was up until, well, he was still walking the dog, even with these symptoms, up until the Wednesday when he was too tired and didn't feel well enough. But on the Monday and the Tuesday of that week after the vaccination, he was still walking my dog with you, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So such a fit and healthy man. Why you both obviously had researched the vaccines and you had your kind of worries about it, but why do you think your father chose to have the vaccine?
Well, at the point that our dad went to have the vaccine, we hadn't actually researched it. We just kind of a general feeling of this, something doesn't feel right. Okay. We've obviously done lots of research since, but the reason my dad went for the vaccination is because he believed he was doing the right thing. He believed what the media were telling him. He believed the government. He thought he was doing the best that he could with the situation, to help others, to stop the spread of COVID, and to protect himself, and more importantly, to protect my mum. So the two of them made a decision together that that was the right thing to do, despite our pleas with them not to have the vaccine.
I had done some research on the vaccine before he'd gone, actually.
Oh yeah,
and I did forward him various things, you know, emails, WhatsApps with various information that I'd found out for myself, and he just wasn't interested, because in his mind, he's always trusted what the governments have done and what the mainstream media, you know, why would they be giving us this vaccine if it wasn't safe and this, that and the other, and it's my duty, you know. I'm scared of dying, I'm not bothered. I kept saying to him, so why are you going to have this vaccine then? Well, I need to, you know, it's my duty to have it. To protect other people, to protect your mum.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people feel like this. A lot of people feel this way. They feel like there's no other way out. There's no other way out of the lockdown. And that's the response I've had to people when I've spoken to them. And I said, look, you need to listen to what's happened to my dad. This is it's a possible death. I'm not saying it is definitely. I can't say it's definitely. I can't prove it. But it's a possible. It's highly possible under the circumstance of what happened. And they have, some people have turned around and said, well, what other options are there? You know, what's your idea? How do you think we're going to get out of lockdown then if we don't all have this vaccination? And I'm like, whoa, I don't know. You're asking the wrong person, but I'm definitely not, you know, I don't think this vaccine is necessarily, the way forward. I don't know. No.
I just want to go back to the thing you said there, because I mean, when you tell the way you tell the story that he was sick instantly after, the hospital confirmed he had a heart attack on the Sunday and he had the vaccination on the Saturday. The evidence looks circumstantially kind of pretty tight that the vaccination caused it, but you're right to say that there is no proof. But how would you prove this? What's the normal way of proving it, and why are we not going to get proof?
Well, I presume that the normal way of proving it would be the only way through a post-mortem after the death of a loved one. But if someone has died of heart failure, how would you ever prove?
How can you prove that the vaccine caused the heart attack that caused the heart failure? That's the issue. If we haven't got, we're only looking at it from post-vaccination. We haven't got any information of what my dad's heart looked like pre-vaccination. The only information we've got is that we knew. I, in particular, walked my dog with my dad every single day without fail. And we walked up steps and hills, and he was no more out of breath and struggling than I was, and I'm 41. So that's my way of thinking, that if he had any sort of heart condition before, you know, a weakening of the heart, you know, any sort of breathlessness or anything like that, he wouldn't have been able to walk as I can. I'd have been waiting for him. And, you know, the week before he went for the vaccine, he painted the ceiling in my mum and dad's living room, which is quite big. And he painted it all in one day.
On his own.
Up the ladder. So, I mean, you can't do that if you're poorly, if you're not a well person, you would struggle with that sort of thing.
Yeah. So
when you can't prove it, when you say you can't prove it, when you say you can't prove it, though, I mean, what out of 100, out of 1,000, or whatever you want to do as a percentage, how much would you indicate it was the vaccine that killed him?
100%. We think 100%.
There's 100%. zero doubt with you.
No.
And yet,
no
okay,
doubt.
so zero doubt with his two daughters who watched him all his life, and I mean, you've never, until he died, obviously, you never spent a day without him, so you've watched him all that time, and you're absolutely sure. But then the doctors and the medical situation is that there's a big question mark there.
Can I just also add a point that obviously when you lose a loved one, it's very, very painful. For me, it would be easier to say, oh, it wasn't the vaccine.
Yeah.
He died of natural causes. He must have had a dodgy heart or whatever. For me, that's easier to accept. So we wouldn't be doing this. We knew my dad, like you say, he was our dad. We were with him nearly every day. And I just feel like it would be easier for us to accept it and easier for us to deal with this if it wasn't the vaccination. So that's the angle we're coming from. We're not saying, oh, it's the vaccine, just because, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, trying to.
Yeah, we prefer
it to not be the vaccine. That's what I'm trying to say.
Because then we would think that there was nothing we could have done about it.
Whereas for me, it was unavoidable. Yeah. Because if he hadn't have had that vaccine, I'm 100% certain he'd still be with us today.
And that's what's even more heartbreaking for not only us, but for our mum, who is really, really struggling with this, because she went with him and she had her vaccination with him. And she knows, that we tried to tell her not to have it. So for her, this is really, really difficult. But she 100% as well believes that it was the vaccine that killed our dad. Yes, 100%. And she is not having her second vaccination.
Right. So she's gone, just to be really clear for everybody, she wanted the vaccine just as much as your father. We both asked them both not to have, and they both said no. Now she's done a complete about turn with what's happened. And there's no doubt in her mind, she's as strong as you both are, that it's the vaccine. Right.
Yeah.
And she's now refusing her second jab.
Second one, yeah.
Okay. Right. So what did you do after you realized kind of what had happened and you believe what caused it? What was the next part of the story? What happened next?
Well, for a week or so, we didn't do anything because we were in total shock. And we were discussing the possibility of the vaccine, saying it must have been the vaccine. It must have been. But it was early on. It was in January. So nobody at all was speaking about any side effects at all of this vaccine. I mean, now there obviously people are speaking about the AstraZeneca vaccine and blood clots, but at the time, at the end of January, nothing. So for us, it's really, really difficult because anybody we mentioned it to or want to discuss it with just point blank refused to believe that it was related to the vaccine. So we struggled with that, didn't we?
Yeah.
And we wanted to tell someone. We didn't know who to turn to. We needed to tell somebody. And we didn't know about the yellow card scheme because nobody had ever told us. The doctors at the hospital didn't tell us, even though we queried the fact that he possibly was linked to the Pfizer vaccination. Nobody at the hospital said, well, look, maybe we should report this or maybe you should report this. So you were doing some research, weren't you?
I was doing some research and I realised that the Americans have I think it's called VAERS or something like that, their adverse reaction reporting system. And I thought, well, we must have something like that in the UK. So I obviously went online and had a quick look and it came up with the MHRA yellow card scheme. So I just did it then. I think it was about 10 days after he died. It was on the 9th of February. I filled it out.
Yeah.
Filled it out there and then it took over 6 weeks for them to
6.5
even respond.
So they responded on the 25th. I'm just looking at my notes here because I've got it all written down. So they responded on the 25th of March, 6.5 weeks after the initial report on the 9th of February. And they asked for further information. So the further information that they required was, number one, did you have a post-mortem, which we replied no. 2, the certified cause of death, which we replied heart failure. 3, past medical history, which we replied none. So we sent that response back on the 29th of March.
Yeah.
When we had that email, there was at the bottom of the email, there was also information that if you were not happy with the service that you received from the MHRA, then you should contact a lady called, I don't know how you pronounce it.
I think it's Faiza or
Faiza Farouk, who is the service team manager for MHRA. So obviously we were not happy. We'd waited 6.5 weeks for a reply. So Lisa emailed her on the 29th of March and again on the 1st of it. No, sorry, I've got that wrong. Lisa emailed.
I responded to the MHRA with their questions on the 29th of March. They sent me an automated email that had, if you're not happy with your service, please contact Faiza Farouk. So on the 1st of April, I emailed her to say, well, I'm not happy with the service. We've had to wait 6.5 weeks for anybody to even contact us once we've reported a death. And then I didn't hear anything. So I emailed her again on the 9th of April, and I've still not heard anything from her. We have, however, yesterday had an email from the MHRA, and they responded. Basically, they offered their condolences, thanked us for filling out a yellow card, confirmed that they'd received our email on the 29th of March.
And then they told us that the additional information that we had given them has been updated to the report case folder. So they have recorded the note of post-mortem, heart failure as the cause of death, medical history, none. So they've added that to the report case folder.
Which is not really a lot of information, is it?
No. Have you got a reference number for that case folder yourselves?
Yes. Yeah.
They've actually given you, so it's okay. It's referenceable. When you first filled in the yellow card, did you get acknowledgement back when you first filled in? Did you get any form of email?
Yes, it was like an automated email.
Yeah.
It's like an automated response. So thank you for filling in your yellow card. Basically, we'll have a look at it and we'll get back to you.
And that had the reference.
That kind of thing, yeah. I mean, I will have it somewhere on my emails if you want me to have a look specifically what it says.
But that, so yeah, the automated response was after the initial report, but then 6.5 weeks later was the request for further information. And then 2 weeks later, so that was the other day.
Yeah, the 12th of April.
They have responded to our additional information, offering condolences, thanking us for filling out the yellow card, confirming they have received our email, and as I said before, that the information has been updated to the report case folder. We asked a question when we submitted the additional information, and the question was, what are you going to do about our father's death?
Right. Well done.
They responded with this.
To address your question around what the MHRA is doing, I would firstly like to emphasise that the MHRA strongly encourages the public to report on the basis of suspicion, as you have done, and for which we are grateful.
Now, I would say to that, the majority of the public are not aware of the yellow card reporting scheme.
Exactly.
The next bit goes on to say, I would like to assure you that the MHRA takes all reports of fatal events in patients who have received a COVID-19 vaccine with the utmost seriousness.
And we would reply, so why did it take the MHRA 6.5 weeks to respond to our report of a possible death after a Pfizer vaccination?
Then goes on to say, where these events are reported to us, we follow up to find out full details of the events and the cause of death, and where applicable, further information of any post-mortem findings.
So basically, they only have the additional information we have given them, which is post-mortem, no. As I said before, cause of death, heart failure.
Yeah, it's
none. So, let me get my notes. So basically, the MHRA do not know anything further about the circumstances of our dad's death. How he became ill, what the time frame was, what the symptoms were. So in our opinion, how can the MHRA be closely monitoring this black triangle status vaccine. They don't know anything about our dad's death.
And I just want to kind of almost just pause us just to think for 2 seconds, because all the people watching, I want them to have a think about this, because I want them to have a guess. I want everyone watching to have a guess right now, as of the 13th, 14th of April. How many people do you think have reported a death to the MHRA? How many deaths have been reported on the yellow card? I just want people to try and imagine that number. If you know, then okay, the game's given away, but just have a think about it. And then the other question we need to ask at this point is, you didn't know about the yellow card. You were in hospital, surrounded by nurses and doctors. Some of them, your GP was saying he thought it could be a reaction. The nurse, that when you called in and said they believed it could be the vaccine. There's enough people there who are in that whole, even with let's say the half of the people who didn't believe it's anything to do with vaccine. There was half of them there, but not one of them told you about the yellow card. And it was Lisa, you 10 days later doing a Google research by yourself, you found out there was a reporting mechanism, and you did it. So for me, there's one is the how many have actually got through and been reported, but then also how many have not been reported. Because it could be a multiple of, quite a huge amount, which is what trying to work out. We're doing like a survey at the moment, which we're trying to work that out. But for the people at home who are kind of not aware of what's happening right now, the answer is not 5. It's not 10 deaths that have been reported. It's not 100, because I think kind of 100 would be enough to stop the vaccine temporarily, call out a pause, wouldn't it? I mean, 100 deaths, surely that'd be enough. 100 reported deaths. Let's see, even half of them were nothing to do with the vaccine. That'd be 50 real deaths. That's enough to stop a vaccine rollout, surely. But the answer isn't 200. It's not 400. It's not 500. We currently have over 700 people who've written down a death on the yellow card reporting system. Which is just crazy.
And I actually think it's getting closer now to 800, because it was, I think when I looked the other day, it was 780 something. To be precise. But because it's and how many, and as a percentage of people, how many, like you say, have actually reported it, because we're not getting told about it.
And also a lot of people don't believe or want to believe that the death of their loved one is caused by the vaccination. They don't want to believe it, and they're in denial.
It is easier to say it wasn't that. It is easier.
So
especially persuade. Imagine how many people just said to pets, "Oh, go along, have it. Go on. Don't worry about it." People have been feeling. Imagine how many people would be feeling guilty, and the consequence on their shoulders if this was gone. So again, gives us just an idea of how many have actually been reported and how many are being hidden. Because of all the ones I know myself that we're watching around, not one's been reported yet within my kind of personal friends and
And I think there's an issue sometimes of conflict in families where some of the family members believe that it was a vaccination, but others don't. So because it's a really difficult time and everyone's grieving, the decision is made just to leave it and just try and get on with your life and try and grieve, which is easier to deal with, because when you do start to ask the questions, it's so hard. It's really, really hard when you start to look into things, and it is easier to think, no, it's a coincidence.
We all have that with, it's the classic thing with the bereavement, that people just remember the last things they said, the last things they did, all the things they didn't do, and people go through a terrible time. Kind of, I should have phoned more, I should have spent more time, I wish I'd said that horrible thing I said a while back, and I shouldn't just. So people go through this awful thing. So to put that on top, any kind of feeling of guilt towards it, or like a belief system, which is where we are with the vaccine. It's like a belief system, isn't it? Because we have a nation of people who believe and people who don't. And so of course, people don't want to rock the boat. So that's going to cause, if they've lost one member of family, they're not going to want to traumatize another member who might have been, who just doesn't want to accept it. So people will choose to be quiet.
No, they will. I
think there's a lot of fear of being judged as well.
Oh, gosh,
for you, if you say, even if, you know, my dad hadn't have died, I wouldn't be participating in this vaccine program because I'm fit and healthy, 41, don't have any underlying health conditions, so I don't see the need to inject myself with something that personally I don't need, and I can only be responsible for my own health and the health of my children. We're all responsible for our own health at the end of the day. So yeah, I do think there is an issue with people are fearful of being judged by others. You know, being labelled as an anti-vaxxer just because you don't want to take part in this vaccination program doesn't necessarily mean that you're an anti-vaxxer. You know, our children have had all their vaccinations. I've been vaccinated as a child. So, you know, we're not anti-vaxxers at all. We just want people to understand.
Although I have to say, the more research I'm doing.
Well, yeah.
You know,
this is.
It does
open. So we weren't anti-vaxxers, but, you know, maybe in the future.
The research, you know, because when something traumatic happens and you lose someone or someone is vaccine injured, you start to look into information that you wouldn't usually look into, and you start to find out things that you never ever knew. So yeah,
and you start to meet people who have had vaccine injured children, and you know, and it's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking.
This is one I'm very sensitive to that word because I've heard it being bandied around towards me and a lot of dear friends for a very long time. But one thing I always try and say is, out of nearly everyone I know who's a so-called anti-vaxxer, is they're ex-pro-vaxxers, because it's ex-pro-vaxxers who had the vaccine who then saw and witnessed the damage up close hands with themselves or a child. And then it puts, of course, when that happens, it puts them on a crusade to try and save other people from what happened to them. And then they go to help people and they get labelled with being an anti-vaxxer. And it's like,
exactly.
I just tripped over that step over there. And I'm trying to warn you, don't trip over that step.
Exactly, yeah. You can only warn people, but ultimately they will do what they like. So, you know, which our point has been proven. We know we tried to warn my mum and dad and they didn't listen to us. And here we are. So
I think the most important thing, the message that we want to get in across is that people must be giving an informed consent to this vaccine. They must be informed. They must understand that the vaccine holds a black triangle status. It's really important for people to know that the vaccine is still under review and it has emergency approval only by the MHRA. If people have that knowledge and have researched their clinical trials and they understand that this is a new technology, that understand that the vaccine has only been used on humans since May 2020, once they're given that information, then they can make an informed consent on whether they choose to participate in this vaccination program. To be led to believe that this vaccination program is something different and it's 100% safe is devastating for us, because that is the opinion of our dad. And nobody is telling the general public that the true facts of this vaccine, the true facts, because if it was made into an NHS leaflet and distributed to the vaccination centres prior to vaccination on the public that come in, and they sat down and read through this information, would they still go ahead with the vaccine? I think a lot of people may change their mind.
I think they would, and that's a really good point. I mean, when I went to go and give blood recently, I had to sign a form, and I had to sign off each risk, and it was I think one of them was kind of like risk of fainting was 1 in 100. Oh, that's okay, I don't mind if I faint. Risk of a blood clot was 1 in 10,000, and it's like, okay, and I literally had all the risks in there, and I signed them off to say that I was happy with them or not. But we don't have anything like that, do we? with the vaccines, and people are not even getting given. Well, apparently, some people are being given the inserts, the little inserts that go in with the vaccine, but I think very, very, very few. And like we established here, people are not being told at the time, oh, by the way, if you have a problem with this, if it's an experimental drug, surely everyone should be given a piece of paper that says, if it shows you how to fill out the yellow card. Over small, from your sore arm to a cough to one day in bed, nothing you have to write home about. But they need that information, so they need it to be reported. So they should be campaigning almost for people to report any information, so the government has the information they need to warn.
It should be at the end of the television adverts, the commercials that we've seen, to pull on the heartstrings of people to take the vaccination. If the media and the government are going to put out that message to people, then at the end of that commercial, that advertisement, there should be a black screen with the yellow card scheme clearly stated. And in my opinion, also, this is a black triangle status vaccine. That will never happen, and we know, but at least the yellow card scheme, the information of the yellow card scheme must be at the end of those TV commercials, in my opinion.
It should do. And I'm just thinking about the radio ads for financial products, where it kind of goes, yes, and you could get a loan, and dreaming of a new holiday, you could go to the tropics, you could buy a new house or a new car, and it goes, interest is compound, and it will liable you to.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a warning, or high speed, because legally they kind of warn the customer that they could lose their house if they go for this holiday. So with our health, when you could lose your life, there should be something there, shouldn't there?
Exactly. So it is informed consent. It needs to be. We can't change people's opinions whether they want to have the vaccine. That's their body, their choice. That's really important. But can educate people so that they have more information to make that choice.
Yeah, absolutely, couldn't agree more. But let's wrap up now, because we've been nearly an hour. I'd just like to do a little bit promotion for our version of the yellow card. We've got an independent vaccine survey on the website, notonthebeeb.com/v-survey, where we're collecting all the data that the yellow card is collecting. But we're also asking some other questions. We're asking vital questions like, before taking a vaccine, were you told about the yellow card? Did the doctor ask questions of your medical history, meaning he might choose one vaccine over another? So we're trying to collect all this information together so we can get a good pool of data that we can put out to experts that can analyse it, that will try and help the public to make that informed choice that you're talking about, Louise and Lisa.
Brilliant.
Well, thanks so much for having you on. It's absolutely cool.
Thank you so much for having us. Thanks. Thank you.
If you have any news, come back and let us know how things have gone if you get any progress.
Yeah, we will do. Thanks very much.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Oh, you crammed.